I think it's safe to say we're gonna wait a couple minutes and hopefully a few more people roll in.
Okay.
I know it's tricky on a Monday morning to have this be like the first thing you gotta dive into. So I do think it's gonna be a very fun and interesting conversation. Oh, I see Greer is in the attendees. Jennifer, would you mind promoting Greer? Thank you. Hi, Greer.
Good morning. Thanks for having me and thank you for moving me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Sometimes when you join, I can't always tell where it's gonna send me. I was just saying that we're gonna hold off in getting started right away and take a moment to let people gather their Monday selves before they join us first thing this morning. So probably wait till 9:05. So if anyone needs to go get tea or water, this is a great time to do it. Hi, Christina. Good morning. Hi there, John. We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes, see if a few more people join, and then we will get started. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, y'all.
Hi there, Zach. Good morning. Good morning, Alma. Good morning, Amber. Just gonna check. Okay, great. I'm not sure on the attendees who the call-in users are, but I don't. So So I'm not sure if there are people who are joining by phone and not in the group, or if they are, but we'll figure that out as we go. We're gonna get started. And we still might have a few more people trickle in, and that's okay. These are just the intro slides, so they might be review for some folks. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren Rosenstein. I'm joined today by Mary Capriva. I am the Strategic Engagement Analyst at Odo, and Mary Capriva is Odo's economist. This is our second working group meeting as the Environmental Justice and Equity Working Group for the Oregon Energy Strategy Policy Working Groups. We also have Edith Bear, who's joining us. She's managing this project, and Hugh Arsenault is also here to ensure that all the comments and thoughts that we hear today are properly captured and noted. Jessica Rikers is also here, who is the manager for the division, and she's going to be monitoring our chat with us today. So if you have questions or comments, thoughts that come up as we're chatting, please do put them into the chat, and then we're happy to have you come off mute and articulate them more. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So as a reminder, this is Odo's mission that we really want to uphold during our time together. The Oregon Department of Energy helps Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. Next slide. So here's our WebEx how to use it slide, which is complex in and of itself. If you're a panelist, you can add comments and questions to the chat. There's also the tiny raise hand function at the very bottom of the screen. You are always welcome to use emojis to signal agreement with other people. If you disagree, I'm gonna prompt you to come off mute and chat a little bit more about the disagreement rather than just use an emoji for that. If you're on the phone and you want to come off of mute, you'll use *6. And if you're having any technical issues, you can message Joshua Price or Jennifer Villanueva. And if your chat isn't working, go ahead and come off of mute so that we can help you with that. And if that still isn't working, then please do email Joshua Price. Next slide. Our working group purpose is to elevate the concerns, barriers, solutions, and areas of interest within the field of environmental justice and equity to support the development of policy recommendations for the Oregon Energy Strategy. Next slide. So in the next, 50 hour and 50 minutes or so, our objectives are to connect research and strategies to address the barriers identified in the February 24th meeting, debrief what we heard last meeting, some key takeaways, barriers from other working groups, and begin to identify strategies to address those barriers. And third, to decide if the group would like to provide high-level guidance or best practices on developing future energy policy. Next slide. So to meet these objectives, we're going to move through this agenda, and I'm going to do my absolute best to keep us on time, though this is a very packed agenda. And so if it's looking tight, or if we want to spend more time in a particular conversation, we can definitely talk about shifting the schedule and might need to consider an ad hoc meeting like we did in phase 1 if that's something that people are interested in. Next slide, please. Here's our working group members. Again, a huge thank you for the time and commitment, experience and expertise that everyone's bringing to this conversation. It's really important for the overall process and product. Next slide. Here's our group agreements. These are the same group agreements that we've used previously throughout all of our meeting times. And they're to ensure we create a space for people to feel brave and share their thoughts and concerns and questions. There's an agreement here that says be conscious of speaking time. And I'd like to add to be brave to step into the conversation and share your perspective. So if you notice that you're not speaking, but you have that feeling of, oh, I'd really like to say this, you're maybe feeling a little nervous or you're feeling a little uncomfortable about it, then please be brave and step into that because your perspective does really matter in this conversation as a whole. And if you're somebody who likes to fill that silence, and you're often the first person to speak, I encourage you to rest, to give it a second and see if somebody who hasn't spoken will step into that space. Of course, I encourage you to come on camera as you're able, though I know being on camera feels exhausting sometimes, so do what you need for yourselves. And if there's something that's missing in these group agreements, please do add it to the chat and I'm happy to build it out later. Okay, next slide. So we've done our introductions. We did a big round of introductions in our last meeting, and because we're a little bit short on time today, we're going to do this in the chat. So in the chat, if you could add your name, your affiliation, your pronouns if you're comfortable sharing them, and then what are you feeling curious about today? Maybe it's something you've processed from the last meeting. Maybe it's something thematic. Maybe it's something process oriented, whatever it is. Maybe you're curious about something that has nothing to do with our meeting, but there's a lingering curiosity of something larger in this world, and that's great too. Good morning. Thank you, John. I'm just going to give it a minute to let people fill in the chat and you can kind of read along and then I'll get back into the slides. Thanks, Sarah. That's a great curiosity. We've got to figure out what this particular phase is all about. I agree. Christina, being curious about the federal level impacts of this work is a great curiosity to be bringing in today. I think it's definitely something to consider. Jess, absolutely talking about bringing it all together. There's so much that's coming from all of the other working groups. And so what does that look like to bring a cohesive and intersectional approach? Greer, let's keep building on the work that we've been doing, keep this progression going. Redirecting subsidies for new natural gas equipment, Zach, rebates for efficient all-electric appliances. Good morning, John. Curious about how we can best fortify Oregon's energy plans and programs against federal threats. Lots in here about federal concerns. I hear that. Thanks, Mark. Similar in the federal policies. Great. Thanks, everyone. If more comes up as you're thinking through this, then please do add it to the chat. All right, let's move forward, Mary. Okay, so here's a snapshot of where we are in this process. So we're in the zone of strategies to overcome the barriers. This is very exciting. I think that last time we all met together, we were trying to identify barriers and issue statements, and sometimes it was difficult to frame it up as a barrier and people were already moving to the strategies. So you can come with that hat on and ready to go, which is excellent. And then next time we meet, we'll be talking more about like direct policy actions and recommendations. We are going to couple what we chatted about with what we're hearing in the other working groups. so that you all have the opportunity to apply the environmental justice and equity lens to the strategic approach. And then this will all get us, one step closer to that policy action. Okay, next slide. So I'm gonna pass it over to Mary, who's gonna lead our next section and lay some foundational information for us. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Lauren. So yeah, like Lauren mentioned, in today's meeting, we're really going to be moving from barriers to strategies for overcoming those barriers. And as we make that transition, we thought it might be nice to do a quick overview of some research in the areas of the barriers that were identified in our last meeting, then that can supplement some of the other resources that we're bringing to this conversation. So in particular, I'm hoping that this research can help us as we try and fill in one of the main limitations of the energy pathways modeling exercise that we've done so far. I think everyone in this group is pretty well familiar with the energy pathways modeling that we did, but I just wanted to throw this slide up here once more as like a quick reminder, but I'll kind of breeze past it to instead focus on kind of that limitation that I'm hoping we can address a little bit more today, which is that with these types of big economic least cost models, what the model focuses on is kind of shrinking or minimizing the total costs and finding those least cost pathways, but they don't usually say anything about who pays those costs then. So the kind of typical idea with this sort of modeling is you shrink the amount of costs and then you decide through policy who ends up paying those costs. And in an ideal world, we use taxes and redistribution policies to ensure that these minimized costs are borne kind of as equitably as they can be, as determined by, society as a whole. That can be difficult in practice, and it asks us to do a lot of work to be really careful with the policies that we develop. And sometimes it might even mean that we want to deviate from that least cost pathway because there's another pathway that more easily or more kind of naturally falls more equitably. So in trying to think about how we develop good policies so that these costs are borne more equitably, there has been quite a bit of microeconomic research to try and kind of fill in the gaps of these macroeconomic models. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. It's kind of what policies have or haven't been able to redistribute some of this cost. And I'm going to try and do it in kind of 3 of the big buckets that we identified from the barriers last time. I'm going to not do workforce as its own bucket and kind of weave it in instead. And I'm going to start with affordability because that's the one that kind of most naturally falls into this limitation, I think. The paper I want to start with for this is looking at a recent paper from Borenstein and Davis, which examines the distribution of US tax credit uptake. For this analysis, they used individual tax return data from 2006 to 2021 to analyze the distribution of clean energy tax credits by household income. They find, perhaps unsurprisingly to this group, that the tax credits are not very equally distributed. Specifically, they find that the lowest 3 income quintiles, so that's everyone earning kind of 60% of total income and below, so that's like middle income and lower. So those 60% of households received only about 10% of all the credits, whereas the top 20% of income earners received about 60% of those tax credits. And while I'm highlighting this one paper, this finding has been shown in several other papers as well from more kind of historic data sets looking further back. This is just the most recent one that has kind of the most up-to-date data. And I think showing it graphically really drives this point home. So this is showing residential energy credits, the average credit per return by income group. So going from 15,000 a year all the way to greater than 20,000 a year. And you can see really clearly here that the higher income groups are receiving on average more of these credits than the lower income groups. And it's not only that they're kind of receiving more, but it gets more and more disproportionate the further we go up the income line. So even a lot of middle income houses are really not seeing these tax credits to the same extent as our highest income groups. And that becomes even more stark when you look at electric vehicle credits, where it's really the highest income households that are capturing most of this tax credit right now. In the paper, they also discuss a little bit of why this might be, and Again, maybe this is stuff that is well familiar to this group, but hopefully just reinforces what you've seen and heard in your work. First, part of the reason for the regressivity of it is just that the tax credit is non-refundable. So 40% of US households don't have federal income tax liabilities, and so just most low and middle income households are ineligible simply by not having a tax liability. From the standpoint of, the tax credit is meant to get more EVs on the road or more, energy efficient appliances in people's homes, it shouldn't really matter if the people adopting it have a tax liability or don't have a tax liability. So there's not really a good reason for this to be non-refundable. And so they make a pretty strong argument in the paper to maybe reconsider that in the future. And this has changed some actually since the period of this research. Now there's some flexibility to claim the credit beyond one's tax liability for the EVs anyway, if they transfer the credit to an eligible entity, a registered dealer, in exchange for a financial benefit at the time of sale. So you go to the dealership and you get a rebate instead. A second explanation that they flagged, and this is something that's definitely come up in this group multiple times, is that renters and landlords aren't eligible for the tax credit. Homeowners really easily are, and a third of homes are rented. So again, that's just leaving out kind of a large segment of the population there. Kind of building on that research, there's lots and lots more research that's been done in this area. So I'm just going to highlight a few other papers that have some interesting findings that might apply to some of the strategies that we discussed today. So one is that it can be really difficult to target subsidies to those who wouldn't have purchased an electric vehicle otherwise. But when those subsidies aren't well targeted, they can become really expensive. So oftentimes there are people who would have bought an EV, incentive or not. In a perfect world, right, we'd target it only to people who wouldn't have bought an EV otherwise, and we'd make the amount exactly the amount that would push them into buying an EV instead of not buying an EV. No incentive is going to be perfectly targeted, but it can be really helpful to track that over time, because it can become really cost ineffective quickly if we're not being kind of careful about that. So for example, if for every 5 subsidies, only 1 new car is purchased, and the other 4 would have adopted anyway, then all of a sudden, the cost of that 1 EV is 5 subsidies, essentially. I want to note this talks about EVs, but this is true of any incentive program for anything, clean energy or not. It's always hard to do this targeting kind of perfectly, and it's always something that should be considered when we think about policy in this space. The second bullet point talks about this idea of upfront funding versus financial benefits over time. And the focus of this article is really on the time value of money. So thinking about how different households think about $100 today versus $100 in the future. So everyone prefers $100 today over $100 in the future, but some people value that $100 today over $100 in the future more than other people. And what this shows is that households with lower wealth oftentimes value that $100 today a lot more than households with higher wealth. And so by just kind of shifting how we incentivize things to more upfront subsidies as opposed to kind of future savings, we can maybe change the distribution of who is able to participate or who chooses to participate in those incentive programs. And then finally, the last subsidy, or the last bullet point here, looks at one specific program in California that targeted EV subsidies for low and middle income households, and showed that those subsidies were passed through to customers at essentially a rate of 100%. So dealers weren't kind of making money off of that subsidy. They weren't increasing prices and capturing some of that subsidy. The subsidy seemed to be getting passed through 100% to the customers, which is just, I think, kind of an interesting thing to hear, because it's always hard to know when you add a subsidy kind of where exactly that money ends up. And so this is, I think, some positive news about how these subsidies might play out. All right, now I'm going to shift a little bit away from affordability and into accessibility and access, and some of what we know kind of about that distribution as well. Here I'm going to focus first on a paper from Davis that looks at heat pump adoption. And what he looks at specifically is the Energy Information Administration's 2020 Residential Energy Consumption Survey to determine how state-level characteristics correlate with heat pump adoption. One of the interesting things that they find in this paper is that the heat pump adoption seems to be fairly equitably distributed across incomes at this national level, which is fairly different from what we see for EVs or solar panels, for example. This graphic shows heat pump adoption by household income for that REX or that residential energy consumption survey data. And we can see here kind of dissimilarly to what we saw in those last graphics, this heat pump adoption seems to be fairly flat across income groups. Two notes though, one is that this doesn't necessarily mean the incentives are this equally distributed. The incentives still might look more like the graphs we saw previously. Just this shows that adoption rates are more equitably distributed. And then also this might not necessarily mean the distribution of heat pump adoption is equitable in Oregon. There's strong adoption of heat pumps in the South at a national scale, and there's characteristics of households in the South that might encourage this behavior for a wider range of households, such as that there's already widespread air conditioning in a lot of houses. But kind of with those caveats in mind, some of what the authors find is that rather than being highly correlated with income, heat pump adoption is more strongly correlated with geography, climate, and electricity prices. And they find kind of similar findings in this Anderson and Kirkpatrick paper that's more recent, showing that milder winters and cheaper electricity relative to other fuels also seem to be driving heat pump adoption. So just a little bit of evidence here that things other than income and subsidies are also pushing heat pump adoption and clean energy adoption. And that's true in other spaces as well.
Mary,
Laura.
before you keep going, John has a clarifying question that I am gonna articulate. Does adoption only count newly installed heat pumps in the last few years? I know a lot of homes in the South have had them for a long time.
So I cannot tell you off the top of my head if this specific graphic is just newly installed or kind of just the question, do you have a heat pump in your house or not? I know that the Anderson and Kirkpatrick paper does look specifically at newly installed ones. So for the kind of the sake of the findings, we know that that's true for newly installed ones. But I would be curious to go back and look at exactly what survey question they use for this. And I can definitely follow up with you, John. Thanks for asking. Thanks, Lauren, for keeping an eye on the chat too. Feel free to interrupt with other questions. So kind of moving from heat pumps to the wider technology, we see that these non-monetary factors also are likely to be important for EV adoption, charging infrastructure, product quality, and or cultural acceptance are all things that are anticipated to have more of an impact on EV demand in the future as we try and meet higher market shares. And they were arguing that perhaps this will actually outweigh subsidies, that these other attributes are really going to be the key for widespread adoption. There's also plenty in the literature showing different rates of uptake for renters. This is something we've talked about a lot, so I'll just kind of breeze past that one quickly. The last thing I wanted to highlight in this section is that it's not just kind of demand side factors, there's also supply side factors that can impact this, and this can go along with some of that workforce discussion that we've seen. So this last paper is a study that looks specifically at disparate adoption of solar PV systems. It first documents that lower income and Black households are less likely to have solar PV systems, and then discusses some of the factors that might contribute to that disparity, noting that low income and Black households receive fewer bids and are quoted higher prices on the online solar marketplace that they examine. I should note that this last bullet, they're looking at a fairly specific sample. They're just using data from this single online marketplace. So that might not be as broadly applicable as some of the other studies that look at more national data or more broadly applicable data, but it still is kind of an interesting finding to think about where there's access to kind of more contractors and more folks who can do this type of work, and where there's access to fewer might be leading to some of these higher prices and fewer bids. The last category that I'm going to talk about, kind of thinking about these barriers and what we know a little bit about the econ literature to help fill some of those gaps from the model, is thinking about education resources and tools. And I'm going to kind of lump all this together and just call it information as I go through the next couple slides to keep it a little bit simpler. In econ, I guess I'll start here. In economics, we often talk about information in kind of two different categories. So I wanted to start off with this Gillingham, Keyes, and Palmer review paper that looks at energy efficiency and kind of lays out this difference between information from market failures versus information from what economics refers to as behavioral failures. And I'm just going to chat about those two different things quickly at the top here and then get into some results. So first, market failures. This might be something that you vaguely remember from like your high school econ class, but market failures are really any time that a market isn't functioning efficiently. Economists say that there's some sort of market failure that's coming into play. There are many, many examples of market failures, and in fact, very few examples of perfectly efficient markets in the real world. But one common example is an externality. So this is any time that something that is affected by the market isn't priced into the market. Pollution is kind of the quintessential example of that, and is a good example for our purposes in thinking about how externalities might make the market work inefficiently. Another form of market failure, though, is missing information or information problems. Oftentimes, you'll first hear about this in economics when you hear about information asymmetry. So this is when one party has more or better information than another party. And the common example of this is like buying a used car. So the owner of the used car has more information than the buyer of the used car, and this can create inefficiencies in the market as well. But any kind of lack of information can cause a market failure. So markets are typically built on the idea that consumers and producers have full information. No one ever has full information, but the more information that someone has, the better they can correctly choose themselves what will bring the greatest benefit and make kind of those efficient marketplace choices. We can see how information problems might apply to the energy efficiency world if consumers don't really know how much savings they're likely to gain from undertaking any type of energy efficiency measure. So for example, how much warmer might my house be in the winter if I upgrade my insulation? Or maybe it won't be warmer, but I'll save some money. And if so, how much money will I save? If a consumer doesn't know that information, it can be really hard for them to make a decision about whether or not to choose to upgrade their insulation, for example. The second main failure that economists talk about is in econ jargon, what we call behavioral failures. And I apologize that econ jargon is usually very jargony and not always very well stated. But really, this is just meant to reference the body of literature of behavioral economics and psychology, and just thinking that we humans don't always make rational choices. So an example of this in energy efficiency could be that maybe you aren't paying close enough attention to your energy bill, so you end up spending more because you left the lights on or took an extra long shower. Your rational self may have preferred to spend that money on a new toaster because yours broke last month, but you weren't really thinking about that trade-off when you were taking your extra 10 minutes in the shower or whatever. So, you know, your rational self is different than yourself that goes throughout the day and makes these choices. But if you have more information or you have kind of cues to help you remember some of that stuff, then maybe you can make choices that are more in line with kind of your perfectly rational self instead of the you that just gets swayed by the moment. The paper I wanted to highlight in this section looks at an experiment that kind of ties in both of these different types of information failures or lack of information. And what this paper does is examines what happens when you send out social comparison-based home energy reports to different households. And so specifically what they do is they send out households information on their own energy use as well as their neighbors' energy use. And what they find is that people receiving this information do reduce their energy use, and that reduction is persistent over time, though the results do decay some. This graphic is kind of a lot, so I'm going to walk through it here slowly, but mostly what it's just showing is those short run results. So first of all, they had two different households or household types in this experiment. One group of households received reports monthly, and so that's the red kind of split line here on the bottom. And then the other group received reports quarterly, that's the blue solid line on top here. And you can see from the graphic that both groups do appear to reduce their energy consumption in response to the reports, but that there's a bit of noise and there's kind of a cycle happening. So I'm going to follow the blue solid line for a minute and show we see they get their report at the quarter, their energy use goes down, but then kind of creeps back up over time until they get their next report. Then it goes down again, kind of creeps up over time throughout the quarter. By the time they get their third report, maybe they're kind of used to it and there's not as much of a behavioral change anymore after that. But they're still at this lower level than where they started from the beginning. So this kind of shows both that short run and those longer run results. To see the longer run results more clearly, though, they also had separated the groups in a secondary way as well. So they stopped sending reports to one group at the end of 2010 and continued with the other group until the end of 2013. And so the blue dashed line shows the group who stopped receiving reports in 2010, and the black solid line shows the group that continued to receive reports all the way to 2013. We can see here that while the groups do continue to diverge, so the group that continues to receive reports does show kind of on average a downward trend there of continued reduced use. The results from the blue dashed line show pretty kind of persistent results that even 2 years later, they're still showing some energy conservation. These kind of show the two different types of information and the two ways that they might have responded to this type of report. So first, the kind of short cycles, those short run cycles, show that people are likely behaving kind of or making small behavioral changes. So this is more of that kind of cue response. It's like maybe you forgot about or weren't thinking about energy efficiency. This report pushes you to think about it again, and you make small adjustments to your thermostat, or you're a little better about turning off the lights. If we think about those long run results, though, that is maybe has more to do with you having changed your capital stock over time. So thinking about this information as informing your purchase decisions, maybe you're buying LED or more efficient light bulbs because you kind of remember that this report showed that you can make those little changes and be more in line with your neighbor. One thing I'll just mention here is that you can see these behavioral changes exist, I guess, from this literature. We can see that there's this change, but these aren't huge changes, right? We're not going to get all the way that we need to by just sending out flyers. There's probably going to need to be more than just that because these are not like huge savings that we're seeing here. A few other pieces of information from this literature that I'll just highlight quickly before I open it up for more questions is there's been some research showing that as solar PV installers gain more experience and learn more about how to do these installations, the cost of solar PV can come down. There's also been some research into energy efficient appliance labeling showing that consumers do respond to this, and they respond most if we show that information in the form of cost savings. So maybe they don't understand that energy scale that well, or that doesn't make a big difference, but once they see it in cost savings, they're more likely to respond and purchase more energy efficient appliances. And then finally, there's an interesting new paper that looks at a model of providing real-time information on EV charger status and how that could increase EV adoption over time, particularly if it's paired with more charger uptime and consumers' belief that charger will be reliable. So providing that up-to-date information really needs to be paired, though, with those chargers being up a bit more. Okay, that was kind of a whirlwind through the economics literature, but I'm happy to take any questions that I wasn't able to take along the way now.
Thanks, Mary. There haven't been really any other questions except for John's in the chat, but we have been seeing some comments from Zach and Christina. Sarah saying it's very interesting. And I think the comments that I'm seeing from Christina and Zach are starting to build toward some of those strategy ideas, which is excellent. It's exactly where we want to go. This information that Mary was sharing was really to start, getting our brains pumping first thing on a Monday morning so that we can see what's happening out in the world and what those strategies could look like for us here in Oregon. I'm going to give it another second to see if there's any clarifying questions before we move forward, or if anyone would like to come off of mute and voice their initial thoughts, that's also great. Okay, then we'll keep on trucking. And of course, yes, Jess is asking to share the slides now. So Jess, I sent an email on Friday to your inbox. Take a quick look, folks. I sent the slides. Perfect. The slides and also a spreadsheet that you can also use and refer to during the conversation if it's helpful to kind of organize your thoughts. So absolutely feel free. And if there's something, as we're going along and you think, oh, that sounds like something that Mary talked to, or I would like more information, we're always happy to kind of, go back and forth in the conversation and build it as you need it. Okay, great. Then let's keep on trucking.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, I'm going to take us through a little bit of what we heard in our last meeting so that, we've heard from Mary. We're going to review a little bit of what we heard, and then we're going to move into what we heard from the other groups as well and our Miro board presentation or discussion. So next slide. So while we identified barriers specific to each of the other working groups' focus, there were some more universal thoughts that came up across the board. There seemed to be these 4 distinct buckets, which were program development, which had crossover with infrastructure in many of the areas, affordability, education resources tools, and workforce. Additionally, there's different barriers and needs for specific communities like homeowners, renters, and the type of housing like single family, multifamily, and manufactured housing. There were some governmental barriers like the lack of agency collaboration or the ability to stack incentives and the lack of consumer protections for emerging technologies. A general barrier of access that may be due to utility constraints, geography, education, and finally, some big picture environmental concerns like the burden and impact of mining and the disproportionate exposure of hazardous conditions to environmental justice communities, both in the location of some technologies and the inability to access beneficial technologies. Next slide. So one way that Mary and I have started to think about these key takeaways in these 4 main categories of access, affordability, workforce, and education resource and tools. And while there's many specific ideas that folks came up with in the last conversation, we noticed for each of the working group themes, that there's this for each of the working group themes. And this is how we synthesize the information at a very broad level. And please note that these are just in draft form. They're likely to evolve as we continue having the conversation. And I encourage you to think about these themes as you're naming strategies to address the barriers in our Miro brainstorming sessions. I'm going to read through them briefly. So the first one, there's big headings in our first column, and the first big heading is access. And the issue statement that we came up with is there is limited infrastructure in tribal, coastal, and rural communities that contributes to the slower rate of technology adoption and the lack of energy reliability. And if you have thoughts as I'm going through these, please do, either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'm happy to have some conversation about this. The second big heading is affordability, and our issue statement is, while incentives and tax credits may offer assistance to moderate income households, they may not provide enough financial assistance to relieve the burden to low income and energy burdened households. Our next big heading is workforce. Our issue statement is, there is a need for holistic workforce training that incorporates cultural humility and technology-specific education so that implementers and contractors are confident and knowledgeable when serving the community to be able to speak to benefits, including health and affordability. And our fourth big heading is education, resources, and tools. And our issue statement is, end users and those in the workforce need better resources to understand energy technologies, programs, and how they are beneficial or burdensome so they can participate in the process of program development, rulemaking, and consumer education. So we also noticed that there's some uncategorized, I'm using air quotes, uncategorized statements and barriers that revolve around environmental impacts, health, and siting. And we want to make sure that those are all points that should be discussed and we want to hear more about them. They're just in this uncategorized because I think there's some nuance to them and I don't necessarily want to lump them into these big headings. They are equally as important, even though they are not categorized this way. Next slide. Okay, so that's what we heard in our working group. We're going to start talking about the other working groups. We can actually go straight to the next slide, Mary. So we're going to start our Miro board conversation here. So just the very briefest of Miro how-tos and navigating. If you're on a trackpad on a laptop, you can use your fingers to move around the board. You can you can head over to the arrow on the left side of the Miro screen, turn it into a hand, click and move yourself around. You can use the trackpad to pinch in and out, to zoom in and out. If you're using your mouse, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You can use I've got to check my rights and my lefts right now. You can use the right click to hold it down and drag yourself to a different part of the board. And I think I've locked just about everything, but if you accidentally move something that's not supposed to be moved, totally fine. Don't stress about it, just leave it. Okay, let's head into the next slide. If you come up with any issues around using the Miro at any point, please do, come off of mute and let us know. And if you're on your, I should say this too, if you're on your phone, it's going to be near impossible to use the Miro. So you can always put things into the chat, if that's easier, into our WebEx chat. And if that doesn't feel like it's working for you either, you can take the time that people are writing on the sticky notes to just kind of think through, jot some ideas down, and then come off of mute during the discussion. And as always, we'll have our comment portal open, so you can always put things in there and everyone can use that. Maybe you come up with something later. Maybe you go talk to your organizations and then say, I got to come up with something else and you want to put it in. Great. Okay. So now our Miro board. Sorry, won't go back one, Mary. Thank you. So for our actual Miro board, when we all go in, I'm gonna bring you all to me and we'll go through each of these frames, and they're actually very out of order. So don't look at that frame 4, 5, 3, 2 thing. I'll just bring you to me so that you know where to go. There's 5 columns, which are divided by color and a black line. Don't worry about the colors. Each column is titled the same as the categories in the spreadsheet that I sent you. That's the list of barriers you identified in the last meeting and those kind of big topic areas. So the first column has the title Access, and this could be anything from the accessibility of funding to language accessibility. The second column is Education, Resources, and Tools. Third is Workforce. fourth is affordability, and the fifth is that uncategorized column in case you come up with ideas that don't seem to quite fit in the other four. But again, it's just as important that we have the conversations. So keep those barriers in mind, and remember that none of this is set in stone. So it's open to your interpretation. We're going to keep it fluid and build a conversation. Once we have all of the ideas down for the strategies to address the barriers, we'll pause for conversation, and then we're going to spend like 30 seconds just sorting them by dragging the stickies that you wrote into one of the boxes on the right that say create something new, need to learn more, and add to something that already exists. So create something new means there's not a policy that addresses this strategy yet. We got to create something new for Oregon. Add to something that already exists. You know, there's maybe already a policy that we have in place, but we want to make sure that it continues to get funding, or we want to maybe think about it a little bit differently, change some of the language. And then need to learn more really heads toward that idea around research and building more information so that we know what the next steps are. Okay, so now let's get into what we're hearing in the other working groups. And the first one we're going to talk about is low carbon fuels. So these are our big headings. Again, access, affordability, workforce, education, resources, and tools. And then I added one here because siting and environmental concerns felt appropriate for this group. So our first one, big heading, access, draft issue statement. Rural and coastal regions have limited public transportation or other VMT, vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies, as well as limited access to renewable diesel or other low carbon fuels, which may extend fossil fuel dependence and delay adoption of low carbon fuels. Affordability. Decarbonization will increase the consumer cost of fossil fuels. Those who can afford to will electrify or transition to another fuel option, and the consumer base for fossil fuels will shrink. Communities unable to transition will bear a greater cost burden for fossil fuel delivery. Workforce. New technologies and fuels present the opportunity of potential economic growth, but also the challenge of training and supporting a new workforce. Consumer behavior and how we use fuels and the equipment they power may also have to change, which may lead to inequities in areas without close proximity to service and support. Education, resources, tools. Oregon consumers and businesses have limited awareness and understanding of the opportunity of low carbon fuels or electrification of current fossil fuel applications. Citing and environmental concerns. Increased policy and economic pressure for energy system expansion to decarbonize and meet growing demand will impact Oregon communities, leading to siting of new gas and liquid fuel infrastructure, as well as development of pilot projects of new technologies near environmental justice communities without adequate consultation and community benefits, continuing a legacy of disproportionate harm. So these are the draft issue statements that we've been thinking about in the low carbon fuels working group that have a nexus to our energy or our environmental justice and equity working group. These are just examples of some of the things that have come up, and you may have, again, some of your own thoughts on this. So if everyone could pop into the Miro board, I think I'm seeing everyone here. And I'm going to bring you all to me. And so here you are at the low carbon fuels. All of those barriers that I just said are here at the very top. And then you'll see our 5 columns of sticky notes. So in order to zoom in, again, you can use your mouse to scroll in, or you can use the zoom in button at the bottom right of your screen. And we're going to take like 3 minutes here to start thinking about what are some of the ways we can address these barriers. What are, we're getting into that solution-oriented thinking of what's an idea that you have, as big or as small, to think through this and to create a strategy? If you have questions, please, come off of mute and ask them as we go. If you need help with anything, otherwise we'll take 3 quiet minutes to have you all start clicking on the Post-its. Sorry, wait a minute. Are they locked?
They seem to be locked, yep.
Are they? What a rookie I am. And now I can't find my unlock button. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, everyone. Now can you click on stickies? Sorry about that. Now let's take 3 minutes. Zach, I'm seeing your comment and you're right, the bullets are different. That's my fault. We updated them so that I did not do a good job of that. We updated them based on what had come in most recently from the low carbon fuels group. So let me change them real quick so that they're better.
Hey Lauren, this is Jessica. As you're changing things, I just want to confirm you're changing what's in Miro to reflect what was in the slides. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. And they're changed now.
Okay. Sarah had a question in the chat, but I think Sarah, the answer to your question is after Lauren changed it, now the one in Miro is the most updated version and reflects what was in the slides.
Okay. So we are at time, but I'm gonna give everyone a second here to kind of take a look and see if there's anything that jumps out to you. that you would either like to ask a clarifying question on that maybe somebody else wrote, or maybe you'd like to come off of mute and chat a little bit about what you've written. I'm also going to take a moment to look through. I mean, I'm looking right here at this very first one in Access that says grants for community-based orgs to purchase EV vans. And I wonder if what kind of, I don't know, how would you create parameters around the kind of community-based orgs? What would the thresholds be? These are the kinds of questions that I'd like to kind of start digging into today. You don't have to answer this one right now, but for everyone, you know, what's that next layer down that you'd like to address? Or I see in education resources and tools, informational fairs to show community members how strategies correlate. Love that. And thinking through it as like, is that an informational fair that like government agencies should be going to? Should government agencies be creating them? Should we be working with community-based organizations? I see in workforce, it says addressing challenges related to funding pots that separate training programs from funding to actually do upgrades and new installs. I would love some clarity on that one, or if the person who wrote it would like to say a little bit more about what does it look like to address those challenges? What are the challenges that we should address in that?
Hey Lauren, it's Amber.
Amber.
Yeah, I think what I'm really kind of pointing at is that a lot of times the funding and grants for community-based organizations or other training-based organizations, you know, there's funding to actually do the workforce, but there is not funding to actually accomplish the different projects and installs. And so because those funds are very I'll use the word divorced in terms of how they can be implemented and how they can be leveraged. There's just a lot of challenges with, you know, I think people to one, accomplish the workforce, but then most importantly, right, ensure that those good jobs, those good quality paying jobs, and that those upgrades are actually reaching the communities that are most needed. So if you just kind of look across the state, there's a lot of different funding that only fund a specific component of the work, not kind of inclusive of all of the components and how it can really be transformative.
Thanks, Amber. I really appreciate that conversation. Are there other things that go for it, Mary? Do it.
Hop in and ask about one of them. I see that leverage others who are trusted by businesses to increase awareness. And I'm curious if whoever wrote that would maybe want to provide a little bit more information. Would this be kind of like creating a space for different business owners to come together and kind of share information? Or is the thought more that there would be kind of a trusted partner who has kind of more information come in and be able to speak to some business communities?
This is Christina. I wrote that one. My mind went straight to like the chambers of commerce. Because they already have that trust. Businesses are members. And so that might be a vehicle to provide information, but also like small business administration. Like, I think there's a lot of potential partners that could help with the business side.
Thanks. I think that's a super interesting, important perspective to keep in mind here since low carbon fuels, I think our modeling showed so much of that's probably going to be used more by industry and businesses and stuff. So having that particular focus, that's helpful to hear how that might play out in a policy recommendation.
I'm over here in the uncategorized column, and I'm seeing one of the sticky notes that says, the issues with citing may go beyond whether there are community benefits and to realistic conversations about impacts and communities being able to say no. For some types of facilities with air quality impacts, those may just be plain unacceptable for impacted community. So I hear this and I'm reading it as a bit of a barrier. And so I would love to hear more about how we build those conversations, those realistic conversations. And then how, because it sounds like, I don't know, there's like almost some rulemaking conversation here, I think. And then also that it gets us a little into some thoughts around community benefits plans and what is enough in that conversation. So if the person who wrote that would like to come off and talk about what a strategy to build those realistic conversations are, I would welcome it.
Hi, Laura. This is Sylvia, and I'm sick, so I
Sylvia!
think and sound poorly today. But
Oh, I'm so
yeah,
sorry.
no worries. But and yeah, like I'm sorry, but like maybe I misunderstood the exercise some. But I've been spending a lot of time with someone who I know works in an area of the country in California where there has been conversations about citing hydrogen facilities, for example, and you know that a lot of our conversation went around, there's often this the way that the argument is presented is basically like what amount of community benefits will suffice. And the question, as my friend posted, is like what amount of community benefit, like what amount of benefits is it enough for a community to like take when there's pollution, for example, when there's like air quality, and I don't think she referred to this specific hydrogen example, but when there's air quality impacts, like what amount of benefits or jobs would you take for your kid to have one more asthma attack a year? That's how she phrased it. And like that was so powerful for me because I think sometimes in the abstract from policy spaces, we just kind of want to understand what's enough for a community to do it, or like, are there enough community benefits that can overcome the concerns of a community? But there might be impacts that are just plainly unacceptable for a community. And I think part of a real community engagement process has to be the ability for the community to be like, this does not really work, because it's often like, how can we make you say yes versus the development community or the policy community or the government just accepting that there are some types of impacts that are just not going to work regardless of the amount of benefits that are wrapped up in the package, if that makes sense. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Thanks, Sylvia. Appreciate that. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. It feels like that, Sylvia, too. Also, and correct me if I'm wrong, the sticky above that one says update land use regulation for siting of new fuel infrastructure to have safety, air quality, distance from schools, hospitals, environmental justice communities prioritized. And it feels a little bit like what you're saying on your sticky, that the strategy aligns with the sticky above yours.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, great. I love it. And there's really no wrong way or to do this exercise. We're all just doing it as best we can and thinking things through. Are there other? Oh, Sylvia, you're getting some pluses in the chat. Some thanks for that, Sylvia. Anything else coming up for anybody else on this one? Seeing that some folks too are starting to drag into the boxes on the side.
Hey Lauren, this is Jessica. Just letting you know that Jess, fabulous name by the way, has her hand raised.
Oh, thank you. Go for it, Jess.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, I really appreciate what you're naming here, Sylvia. I think it's extremely important, and I think it's just hard to. I'm finding as I'm thinking about different policy solutions that just in the context of low carbon fuels and EVs, there is inherently sacrifice zones created by both of these approaches to reducing fossil fuel reliance, and the impact of lithium mining is the biggest thing that comes up for me when we're thinking about immediate impacts and access to EVs within community, and reducing air quality within community is so critical, and at the same time requires reliance on mining on indigenous lands and rural communities and the expansion of that extractive industry. And so I think that's part of the, not quite sure how to capture that fully in the siting piece of this conversation, but that feels like a really necessary element to hold here, that how are we also really focusing on reduction of the need for mined materials and other extractive materials as we're approaching access to low carbon transportation approaches.
Thank you, Jess. Okay. John, your hand is raised. Please go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I always really appreciate the discussion around mining for transportation. And I think one thing that comes to mind that I think we should be working on ASAP is lithium recycling and recycling of other minerals to ensure that whatever we are extracting is being used to its utmost potential.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That's definitely heading into like one of those bigger strategies or solutions that we would need to think up. Let's get it on the list. Okay. I think we'll spend like 30 more seconds here, and then I'm gonna. Actually, you know what I would love to do? In the need to learn more box that's to the far right, there is I lost my mouse. There is a sticky that says, I don't understand bullet 2 saying decarbonization will increase the cost of fossil fuels. What is this assumption based on? It would seem decarbonization leading to lower demand for fossil fuels could decrease the cost of fossil fuels. And Michael Friels is the low carbon fuels lead, and I'm gonna very happily turn it over to Michael to answer this one a little bit more.
Good morning, everyone. So what this refers to is if we're thinking about the natural gas system, we may have a natural gas system that services quite a few people right now, but over time, if people begin to electrify, some of those customers will leave that system, but we'll still have the same distribution system. We'll still have the same costs to bring fuel to Oregon and to service the existing clients or the existing customers. And so if you think of people gradually electrifying, or some businesses are electrifying as well as homes, the distribution costs will actually not decrease at the same rate that that customers will maybe leave the system. And so those who can't afford to electrify or make a transition would be still paying the cost of that distribution system. And so that'll have to be made up in customer costs. So we're envisioning that the costs for that fuel will dramatically increase. And so you can also think of this in terms of delivering gasoline or diesel fuel. If people begin to electrify, the cost to bring fuel to Oregon, we import the majority of our fuels, our petroleum fuels. And so the cost to bring it here and actually provide that fuel will remain the same, maybe even go up in itself. And so as that goes down, as that volume goes down, we'll still have the same costs, but the price will go up because the remaining customers will need to pay more to have that. And if you look at the long-term horizon, you're thinking the people who can't make the transition will be probably our people are most sensitive to some of those price changes. And so there's some real concern on the customers bearing an even greater energy burden over time. So that's my major concern around the affordability of those fuels long term.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you explaining that. So Sarah in the chat has said there are less people in the pool to share the costs of gas. So low income folks get stranded in this pool. It's increasing our disproportionate impacts. And Zach is clarifying. So higher maintenance costs, same fuel costs. Fuel costs could come down as demand shifts to electricity and cheaper renewables.
Well, so maintenance costs may go down a little bit, but if you think of the existing pipeline system, the existing, you may have a couple few workers, but I don't think they will go down. The cost will go down at the same rate as the declining customers. And so if you model it out, there will be a greater costs over time. And so, and also we have decarbonization policies that are requiring natural gas utilities to invest more in low carbon fuels, maybe other low carbon alternatives that will be more expensive than petroleum fuels. And so the fuel itself may become more expensive. The distribution costs may go down a little bit because there are fewer customers, but it won't decline at the same rate as your customer base decreases. And so there's a real risk in those costs increasing over time.
Thanks, Michael. Zach, is that helpful? I think also I'll just quickly add that Zach saying got it. The higher costs include the percentage of renewable fuels. I think it's important to note that the cost of gas is a fuel. It's a global market, and so even though we're decreasing our use here, it's still a global price point, right? So we're not necessarily going to reduce that cost. It just, like Sarah said, there's less people using it. So the cost is not distributed across people.
Yeah,
This is maybe not the best time for Lauren's learning session.
Yeah, so natural gas may become a commodity, and so we may compete, and so we've got other things of tariffs and where the fuel comes from. There are all kinds of challenges. But setting that aside, the distribution costs of just bringing that fuel into Oregon, that will remain. Even if we have, let's say, really simplified numbers of 100 customers you're delivering it to, even though you may decrease your customer base, so now we only have 80 customers, we still need to deliver fuel to all the areas that are serviced within Oregon, and our costs won't decrease. Even though we went down to 80 customers, won't decrease it by 20%. Does that make sense? Because we still have to service the pipes, we still have to distribute the fuel, and so the concern is just over time that's going to become exacerbated even more as customers go away.
Thanks, Michael. Listen,
Hope that's helpful.
I'm constantly learning here, and I'm so appreciative to be surrounded by experts in these conversations because, again, I'm not an energy expert, but I'm very lucky to be with people who are. I do need to move us along, but Zach, I think if there are more questions, and anybody else, if there's more questions around this, we're so happy to answer them. Y'all have my email address. Please do ask anything for these kinds of clarifying questions. I think they're really important to build toward the strategies and the policy recommendations to know this foundational piece. So happy to have those questions anytime. If we could put thanks, Mary, read my mind. Okay, we're gonna move into transportation electrification here. And again, we've got our big headings of access, affordability, workforce, education, resources, and tools on our left column and our draft issue statements on our right column. Here we go. Access. Sufficient and sustainable road maintenance and transportation options, including transit, funding is lacking, and alternative transportation modes are not prioritized with existing funding. Affordability. Utility rates are not reflective of electric vehicle benefits and are cost prohibitive for some consumers, and utility cost recovery is uncertain, making proactive investment a risk. Workforce. Small business and commercial vehicle electrification is challenging across sectors as there is a gap in skilled workforce to repair and maintain vehicles and charging refueling infrastructure, especially in tribal communities, coastal and rural areas. Education resources and tools. Electric vehicle myths persist and many consumers and dealers are unaware of the totality of benefits. Additionally, there is no statewide technical assistance. Okay. Are there any clarifying questions for these draft issue statements? Again, these are from the Transportation Electrification Working Group, but I think also mirror a lot of what we heard as barriers in our working group as well. So I'm going to bring you all to me in the Mira board. Shoop, 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 shoop. And we're over here in this section. And we're going to set that timer for 3 minutes again, so that y'all can start thinking of strategies to address the barriers of transportation electrification, which again, may be something specific to what I just read, or it may be something that you've been thinking about and you would like to see addressed as well. So I'm gonna let y'all get to it.
Hey, Lauren, this is Ranfis. Is there a link to the Mira board?
Yeah, Rampies, we can pop that into, Josh, if you're there and you could pop it into the chat, that'd be super helpful. Thank you. Rampies, I think you have to maybe copy the whole link and paste it in. I don't know that it always works if you just click it. Yeah, Josh is confirming. Best to copy and paste it. So let us know if it doesn't work for any reason. Okay, that is our time. I'm gonna give everyone a couple of moments here to take a look around the board. Keep typing if you're finishing thoughts and thinking. Something jumps out at folks, or if you would like to come off of mute and chat about something that you've written, please hop on in. I'm seeing in access, there's the third one down that says electric vehicle buses, especially in pollution burdened communities. And I'd like to just kind of uplift that one and think about, you know, the definition of environmental justice in the state of Oregon includes youth. And so, you know, that's every single school bus, right? That's a priority community. And so how are we ensuring that the funding is allocated for maybe more of the rural communities, for coastal communities, and that they're able to access those electric vehicle funds is something to think about.
I'm curious too about this utilize apprenticeship programs one. I'm just curious about kind of what the vision there was with thinking about like a policy or a program recommendation, and if whoever wrote that or whoever started maybe wanted to speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, this is Ranfis. So the whole idea is if you consider if this is state or public infrastructure, but even you could articulate this in the private infrastructure, we sort of have the tragedy of the commons, which is no contractor would want to sort of train apprentices because everyone has a very competitive disadvantage. So we might have some few exemplary contractors who are doing the apprenticeship training, which is they're investing in the training, they're having dedicated journey level electricians, train apprentices. The idea would be just make it all across the board, making sure that every person who is investing or bidding to do work related to EV installation or maintenance, that they are training the next generation of workers or apprentices. So unless we address that issue to remove the tragedy of the commons, we're going to have a perpetual state of a skills gap when it comes to a skilled and trained workforce for EV infrastructure. So the things that will come up perennially, we will be groups saying they need access to state funding. As you know, we're at a really tight, we have a very tight budget in the state in general, and to dedicate just workforce training for EV training will be hampered. But if we want to take examples, and I think one of the areas here is research how challenges have been tackled in other areas. I would say, again, apprenticeship model, which has existed over several hundred years, has been a mechanism where the employer and workers pay for those training programs. They're already are able to exist without public investment. So just having a utilization goal ensures that the state is over time building the workforce without additional investments or additional state intervention.
Thanks, Ranfis.
Open the floor and see if anyone else would like to come off of mute, and if not, I got another one that grabbed me. It's over in the uncategorized, and it says, what does it mean to continue to incentivize driving, especially in cities? When more cars on the road equal more roads, equal parking lots, and how this intersects with heat islands and air pollution for communities who cannot afford a car in the first place. In the last transportation electrification working group meeting, which was last week, there was some conversation about this, and it, I think, was really interesting to hear people speaking about, you know, what does it look like to instead, or maybe not instead of, but in addition to incentivizing electric vehicle usage or other incentive programs, what does it look like to encourage other means of transportation, whether it's bicycle, public transportation, safe walking routes? So it's definitely something to think about. And I see a few stars have been added to that one. I don't know if anyone would like to come off mute and speak about it.
Yeah, Lauren, this is Sarah. I put that in there. This is something I thought a lot about when I lived in Nevada and worked on mining justice issues. We've got a lot of Strodes in Las Vegas. It's basically a giant suburb. And just realizing that sometimes when we're, you know, it's kind of like a both and. Just thinking about what it means to, especially, obviously we're in Oregon now, but in Nevada and in Las Vegas, when we're thinking about, it's a very car-centric culture there, but you know, there's multiple pathways to decarbonizing and making more efficient transportation, and like the only one doesn't have to be all EVs. You know, it's recognizing that maybe the funding and energy, time, and resources that we use towards getting people into EVs, we could take some of those resources and actually, you know, build a walkable, make Vegas a walkable city, for example. So that's kind of where I was coming from with that. Is just, especially as we talk about creating better access in rural communities, having to think more about, you know, about what that means, especially because obviously, like in rural communities, there's a different culture around their vehicles and what they're used for, and just, yeah, lots of nuance and things to consider.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, yeah, thinking about that diversification is an important consideration. And I'm even seeing in a couple over in affordability, there's a sticky that says bike and e-bike rebates, bike theft prevention, like registration and places to safely lock bikes. And maybe we would add more safe biking routes to that as well as one of the ideas. I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a nice place to kind of build the conversation. Thanks for bringing it up. I see that there's still a couple of folks who are typing or checking things out. I am going to get ready to move us along. And I see Greer adding, yes, safe bike lanes are so needed. And so maybe that's something too that, you know, Mary and I, in between now and our next conversation, as we're starting to think through what a policy recommendation could look like, we'll do a little more research on other states or other areas where that e-bike and bike work is happening and see what we can build on that. I know Washington State, they're launching, I think, their e-bike rebates right now. Yeah, and Jess is adding ++ for rural and coastal communities. Okay, I'm going to move us into our next part here, which is the building electrification, efficiency, and DERS. And so again, our big headings and our draft issue statements. The big headings here are a little bit different, but I've tried to kind of highlight where it still fits into our access, information, workforce, and affordability thoughts. So big heading, building efficiency and electrification in residential and small commercial. Draft issue statement. Energy efficiency and electrification measures are too expensive for many Oregon households to prioritize over other spending, and their benefits are not well understood. This may be especially true in lower income households and in rental properties. Next big heading. efficiency and electrification in large commercial and industrial. Statement, electrification may not be feasible for some commercial and industrial loads. Comprehensive strategies may help business and industry leaders to prioritize energy measures. Big heading, maximize benefits from distributed energy resources. Statement, distributed energy resources are not affordable, and state policies do not value their full range of potential benefits. Big heading, facilitate greater use of demand response. Statement, demand response is not well understood, and Oregon utility customers are reluctant to buy into programs. Many Oregon utilities have not yet implemented demand response programs. So now we're going to go diagonal from where we just were in the Miro to the building electrification endures. I'm going to bring everyone here. Shoop. And we're going to hop into that same 3-minute brainstorm. And of course, if you've got questions, please do either put them in the chat or come off mute to clarify. We'll get started. Thank you. Okay, that's our time, but I'm still seeing folks who are adding some thoughts here and there. So keep on going and take a look around for other people's notes. If there's something that you want to uplift or ask a question about, please do. I'm seeing a lot overall around needing more workforce training and maybe some standards in that training, apprenticeship utilization goals, and I've seen this one a few places, set goals for hiring women, BIPOC, and disadvantaged communities. I see here in access also the LIHEAP threats are concerning, which kind of brings in the federal concerns. I think that people, sorry, that's an access, Josh. The federal concerns that people are having and how if there are things that are being, you know, this LIHEAP threats, if that's feeling threatened on a federal level, then is there a way to respond as a state? So it's, and then I think the one sticky note above it, which says to continue to allocate funding. And I saw another sticky note. I don't remember which column it was in, but it says basically that incentive programs need to be continually funded, which I think also addresses the idea that if it's not at a federal level, then what does it look like for the state to take that on? This one's interesting under affordability. It says tax data centers to fund resources for low income households.
That one was me. There's a bill making its way through the Minnesota legislature to do that right now. See where it goes.
Okay, thanks, John. We're gonna look that one up. Are there other things that are jumping out to people? You know, we're also kind of coming to a close, so sometimes it can feel like get to that wind down place where people feel a little tired and ready to just put their thoughts in and walk away for now. I'll give it maybe one more minute in case anyone wants to come off of mute. I do see in this education resources and tools, the one that says storytelling programs highlighting benefits across class climates. Whenever I see something like this, I think too about who is doing the storytelling. And I know we've seen in a couple of the other sticky notes about needing to, you know, for states to work with trusted partners across the state agencies, to work with trusted partners and community organizations. And so it makes me think, like, how does that funding trickle, or maybe not trickle's the wrong word. How do we flow from the state to those community orgs in order to ensure that they're being funded for their storytelling in that work? Okay, I'm gonna bring us,
Hey, Lauren,
yes.
Jess had her hand raised.
Oh, so funny. My little thing doesn't show it very well. Please, Jess. Thanks, Jessica.
Oh, sorry about that. This is Jess with Road Clement. Yeah, that makes me think a lot about, we are one of the community navigators for Jackson County, the Duckless Heat Pump Chip Dip program. And something that's been really challenging in that is just how much of a learning curve there is to build those skills in our team to be able to understand the nuances of the incentive programs, of even just the HVAC models and units that are going into people's homes, which is a brand new skill for folks on our team to be building. But then that funding only lasts for a year to 2 years. And so creating an entirely new program, training folks up to be able to navigate that, and then not being able to sustain that over time with certainty is really challenging. And so I think there was a lack of community orgs that could actually step into that role. And so there just needs to be a lot more consistency and specific training, I think, to be able to transition from us advocating for funding the programs to actually implementing them.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, I think that's a really great crossover to bring up too around that workforce training, and then also the like funding allocation of, you know, admin funds, and how, I mean, I think what we've been hearing across the board is that there's never enough admin funds available. And so if we're counting on community organizations to take this on, and the community org has to create a whole new program, then it has to be funded. And like you're saying, not just for the kickoff, but for the duration of. So it's, I think, a great point. Thanks for uplifting that. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. I'm gonna keep this Miro board open. Also, I'll keep it unlocked for the rest of the week, so that if you think of other things, please do feel free to revisit it. And if you speak to other folks in your organization and they want to add things with you, please feel free. But we're going to move over to developing clean electricity generation and transmission. So Mary, if you want to bring the slide back up. I'll also note that we're running low on time, so I'm gonna do our best to wrap us here. But we are gonna run out of time for the final short discussion I was planning on having. So I've got some thoughts on how we can move forward. But for now, we'll focus on developing clean electricity generation and transmission. So again, these big headings are a little bit different, and I'm gonna read them out loud. So our big heading, facilitate responsible development of electricity infrastructure in Oregon. Issue statement, limited information, delays during the siting and permitting processes, and decentralized utility-specific energy planning and procurement efforts hinder efficient development in Oregon that equitably considers and accounts for all those affected. Heading, promote resilience for local communities. Statement, utility obligations to consumers system-wide may not align with meeting local resilience needs, including both energy resilience and community energy resilience. There is inadequate funding, support, and regulatory certainty for local governments and communities to fully meet these needs. Heading, enhance the availability and efficient usage of transmission regionally. Statement, decentralized regional planning complicates proactive planning, and inconsistencies across different jurisdictional processes impede efficient development that equitably considers and accounts for all those affected. Heading, foster regional collaboration and efficient resource sharing. Statement, Oregon is part of a regional grid that lacks a formal centralized structure to promote regional collaboration. This reality is a barrier to achieving efficiency benefits from more centralized regional planning and operations. And I see folks are already in it. I'm gonna click the bring everyone to me for this. And I'm sorry if it messes somebody up who's already in the zone, but I just want to make sure we're all in the right place. Sorry, I think I just ruined a few people. I can see all of the cursors go shoo, 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 shoo. But I think we should all be here now. So go ahead. I see some people already getting started. We'll take a few minutes, 3 minutes, to start filling in these stickies. And then have a little discussion. Okay, that is our time. Take a second to look around and see what we've got. Right off the bat, some of the things that I'm seeing are around community benefits, community conversations, community engagement, and needing to create strong standards around those. I think that's something that also, there's part of it that maybe ties into some of what is being lost with Justice 40 federally going away. And that community benefits plans might not be included in everything. And so how do we as a state build that out? What that would look like? And maybe community benefit plan is not developed solely by a state, but through some other work with community organizations, so that plan to plan kind of is more community led. I'm seeing over here too, the improved fire risk safety measures for new transmission infrastructure. So I'm thinking that some of this is like very, because we know the model does not address fire directly. And so this is a way that we can kind of maybe bring that out more purposefully. If anyone wants to come off of mute in these last few minutes. Mary, is there anything jumping out for you?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious some about this support tribally owned and operated utilities, if there's specific kinds of support, or if that's kind of meaning financial support. And folks can put in the chat if they have a response to that too, but if they want to come off mute and add anything to that, I'd be curious about that.
Okay. I think we've kind of come to that place in time where people are ready to wrap, which is 100% fine.
Hey, Lauren, Group
Yeah.
just put a question in the chat.
Great. Here I see it. It says, I didn't write that, but assuming utilizing tribal owned utilities on projects. That could make sense, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Gru.
I know a few people have had to drop also, so it could be that the person who wrote it isn't in the virtual room anymore. So we can always, we'll summarize things again and get back to everyone. Okay, well, feel free to keep on messing around in the Miro. I'm going to bring us back to our PowerPoint to round us out for the day. So I introduced this idea last time to develop a more encompassing process for the Oregon Energy Strategy that describes how lawmakers can work to prioritize justice and equity across all decision-making and policy development. And I shared this a little while ago at our last meeting and then again at the very end of last week. So and we didn't get a chance to have much of a conversation then. We're not gonna be able to have much of a conversation now, but I think what I'll do is I'll put something together in an email and maybe do a quick survey response so that I can gauge people's interest in contributing to this. And I'll send Washington State's write up again to everyone so that you can kind of look through it. It's about 6 pages. And this is kind of a key 7-step process for building equity into clean energy policies that I'm really interested in including in Oregon's energy strategy. So I'll get a little write-up together, send it to y'all via email, and then gauge interest in participating in whether that's like full collaboration or co-creation, or having something to respond to that you can react to and provide input and feedback on. Just gauge your level of interest in wanting to participate in it. If there's any thoughts right now, I'm happy to hear from anyone. Okay. Then next up, we've got our dates for and times for our next meetings. We'll have it's a longer meeting on April 30th from 9 a.m. to noon. We will take a little break in there so that you can stretch, get snacks, drink water, bio breaks, all that. But we'll be really diving into the recommendations. So Mary and I are going to be taking everything that we've heard today, that we're seeing on the Post-its, and what we're hearing in the other groups, and we're going to start to try to draft what we think we're hearing into potential policy recommendations, and then bring them to you so that you can react to them, so that you can get feedback on them. It may be also that in this time you think of recommendations, draft recommendations that you would like us to take a look at. That's totally fine too. Come with whatever you'd like to for that longer meeting. And then depending on people's interests, we might get into the other framing that I was just talking about. So next slide. So here's the other working group meetings. There's a lot happening on April 30th. If you can't go to it, then a reminder that the meetings are all recorded, and so you can always watch them later. And then finally, maybe you think of something in a day or a week, and you think, oh gosh, I need to comment on that, and or maybe you're an attendee, and so you weren't able to use the Miro board. We would love it if you added any comments to our public comment portal so that we can capture those and include them as well. And with that, 1 minute over, I'm really sorry. But thank you all so much for spending time with us this morning and contributing so much to this process. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.